you guys hear me? Yes. I want to see you better, so that light is blinding. Much better, much better. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. In 1939, Poland had the largest Jewish population, 3 million Jewish people. 91% of those 3 million were murdered. I represent the 9% that survived. As you can see on the screen, my name is George Rishfeld, and I'm a Holocaust child survivor. I understand you guys are very, very fluent in the Holocaust and the Second World War and so on. So, and I don't know how many of you have listened to survivors before, but my story is a little bit different. My story is that it happens in 2 parts, what I'm going to share with you. The first part is the part that I do not remember because I was too young. The second part is the part that I do remember, okay? So let's start with the first part, which was told to me by my parents. In 1939, Hitler bombed Warsaw. Which is the city that we were living in and the city that I was born in. My father was a furrier, made fur garments, and we were very, very affluent because he had a nice sized factory and a very nice business. So I'm told that he wrapped me in a whole bunch of furs and took me to a town by the name of Vilna. Now, Vilna was a good day's travel from Warsaw. And the reason that they went there was, number one, to escape the bombing in Warsaw, but also because they thought they'd be safe. And my mother's parents, my grandparents, and my mother's younger sister, Felicia, a 9-month-old daughter, and a husband were living in Vilna as well. So my parents felt that they would be safe and be with family. Was as time went on, Vilna became the Vilna Ghetto. And I don't know if you guys have come across that in your studies, but it was one of the prominent ghettos in Europe and in Poland at the time. And it was abandoned and destroyed in 1943, and only 5% of the people that were in the Vilna Ghetto survived. During that particular time, unbeknownst to me, an arrangement, or you might also call it a deal, was made between my parents and a Polish Christian family. Now, who was that Polish Christian family? The name was Frankiewicz, and they were what we call and what are known as righteous Gentiles. Now, I don't want you guys to be embarrassed, but raise your hand if you don't know what the word Gentile means. Okay. The word Gentile only means not Jewish. That's all it means. So you can be a black Gentile, you can be a yellow Gentile, you can be Japanese, you can be Chinese, you can be Korean. No matter what, as long as you're not Jewish, you're a Gentile. Well, There were thousands of righteous Gentiles during that period that saved Jewish lives. So here was the deal. The family would take me in and hide me, just like Anne Frank was hidden. I understand that you guys read the story of Anne Frank. The only difference between, two major differences between me and Anne Frank is one, I'm a guy, she was a girl, and number two, she did not survive, she was murdered, and I'm here to tell you the story. So I really consider myself a male Anne Frank. The difference also is that I was hidden by a righteous Gentile family, and I was the only one that they were hiding. Where Anne Frank was, there was more than Anne Frank, there were more people that were in hiding in Anne Frank's space. Well, who were these righteous Gentiles? The senior of the family, who I ultimately called Papa Franskevich, was my father's foreman in his factory. His wife, Mama Franskevich, who was just his wife and a homemaker. And they had a daughter by the name of Helinka, or in English it would be Helen. And Helinka was 20 years old at the time, and she was my father's bookkeeper. So here was the deal. The deal was, no matter what happens, save the child. And if my mother survives, and my father does not, return me to my mother. If the opposite happens, and my father survives, but my mother does not, return me to my father, and my father then made a vow, and he promised he would marry Helinka, so that I would have a complete family. Well, as it turned out, both parents survived, and we'll get into that. Okay, so I'm told that life in the ghetto was really very, very difficult. First of all, there are a lot of people crammed into a very small space. There was very poor medical care. There was very poor availability of medicine. Food was very scarce. Fresh water was very scarce. And people were literally dying in the street. And they were literally leaving them in the street because they had no place to bury them. So dead bodies were lying in the street. I don't remember any of that, okay? What had happened during that particular time, I'm told, was on one particular incident, my aunt, Felicia, was walking in the street, and a Nazi walked up to her and started to get fresh with her. And she instinctively turned around and slapped him. And he took out his pistol and put a bullet in the baby's head, my cousin's head, and put a bullet in her head and just left him there and walked away. My father had escaped from the ghetto, and for punishment of his escape, my grandparents were shot and murdered and put into a mass grave. So I never got to meet my grandparents, I never got to meet my aunt, I never got to meet my cousin. My uncle, who was there as well, after they shot my aunt, they took him, transferred him to Auschwitz, and murdered him in Auschwitz. Fortunately or unfortunately, those are stories that I don't remember, times that I don't remember because I was too young. I'm told that I was thrown over a barbed wire fence into the arms of Helinka and her 20-year-old boyfriend. Now, look at me today. I don't think they could throw me over a fence today. But at that time, I was very small, and as a matter of fact, when I was born, I was really only 4.5 pounds, and I was anemic. So I do not remember flying over the barbed wire fence. But what I do remember is walking into the apartment of Mr. and Mrs. Franskevich, who, as I told you, I ultimately called Papa and Mama Franskevich. So here's where my memory really begins. And here's where I can actually tell you I was a witness to, okay? The apartment itself was what is known as, in the United States, what is known as a railroad flat. And a railroad flat is very simply just one room after another, after another, after another, okay? Just like railroad cars. And what's important in this, in my story here, is that you walk into the main door, the front door, and if you made a U-turn, there was a bathroom, okay? Which we'll get to in a few minutes. So I'm almost embarrassed, not with you guys, but I'm almost embarrassed when I speak to other survivors. And I'm at the museum and I meet other people that are 10, 15 years older than me, that are in their 80s and 90s, God bless them, that I consider myself a survivor. As a matter of fact, at the museum they call me the kid, okay? Because they were either in a labor camp or in a death camp. I was too young to be in a labor camp, and I was too young to be in a death camp, and I got lucky, all right? So you guys are very intuitive, I'm told, but can you see what's on my forehead? What's on my forehead? What's it say? I can't see. It says Mr. Lucky, and I'll tell you why. Besides the fact that I was saved by this righteous family, it says Mr. Lucky because of the following incidences. We lived, in the building that we lived in was 4 floors, no elevator. We lived on the 3rd floor, okay? So obviously I had to walk up and down. Well, they used to take me out for walks at night to get some air, and they would carry me. On Sunday, they took me to church, and they would let me walk down the stairs. Well, this doesn't make any sense. At the time, I didn't know any better, but even to this day, I still think about it, and I say, where's the logic? Why carry me at night and let me walk during the day? Every time I came up or down those stairs, nobody came up or down those stairs. That is sheer luck. Because if anybody would have come up or down those stairs, one of those persons may have turned me in, and I wouldn't be here to tell a story. Now, the other issue is, the Franskeviches were living in this building with no children except for Helinka. Helinka was 20 years old. Now, who's this kid, right? Who's this kid living with them in this building? They must have known. I was there for almost 4 years, 3.5 years. They must have known that I was there. Mr. Lucky. I got lucky. Okay. Well, one of those nights, we were out in the street, and you got to understand, at that time, my speech was not that great. So I would slur some of my words. But also, at that age, you don't lie. So here we are in the street, and this Nazi comes over to us, jumps out of his Jeep, and as I'm standing here, I can still feel it, pinches me on my cheek, and says, "Where's your mother?" And I blurted out in a broken Polish that she's in the ghetto. Well, it sounded to him like I said, she's lying in the mud somewhere. And he laughed, and he thought I was this guy going to be a comedian. And he pinched me on the cheek again, and he reached in the Jeep and gave me an apple. He patted Helinka on the rear end and told us to keep walking. Mr. Lucky got lucky again. All right. We would go to church on Sunday. Well, I don't know if you read about this, but Hitler wanted to get rid of as many Jews as possible. So what did he do? He sent trucks around to churches as well. He also sent them around to homes and to apartments in case righteous Gentiles were hiding, especially Jewish children. So here we are in church. And by the way, anybody that's interested, I can show you later. Got my Star of David. on the back of it, I've got a St. Christopher medal. And the St. Christopher medal is what saved me. And I still have my rosary beads, and it's my good luck charm. And here we are in church, and the truck comes looking for Jewish children, and Alinka, being smart and knowing what she was doing, she says to me, grab your stomach, start to cry, make believe you're sick, make believe you're sick. And I said, great, nice game, okay, fine. I didn't know what was going on. And she picked me up, we walked out, they walked in, Mr. Lucky got lucky again, they didn't even look at us. One day, and by the way, that was called his final solution, when they were out to kill everybody that they could, okay? One day we're in the apartment, and the truck stops in front of the building. And the Franskeviches knew what was happening. So they told me to lie down under my bed. My mattress was about this thick, okay? And make believe that this is my bed, right here. So if you take the blanket and you drew it all the way down to the floor, right? As somebody walked into the room, all you would see was blanket. You couldn't see what was under here. So they told me, lie down under the bed, don't blink, don't breathe, don't move, no matter what happens. And I'm lying there under the bed with the blanket drawn down, and I hear footsteps, I hear chatter, I hear voices, and then all of a sudden the blade comes through the mattress and just touches my chin. And I just close my eyes, it doesn't break skin, and then it comes back out, and I hear more voices and more footsteps, and then the next thing I know, the Franskeviches asked me to get out of there. Well, if that Nazi wasn't lazy, and if that Nazi would have come over and picked up that blanket, I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. Got lucky again. One day, Helika went to work in the German factory as she did, and with her father. It was all for survival and being able to get food rations and so on. And Mama Franskevich said she was going to go out and get some food and do some shopping. And she said, no matter who comes to the door, no matter who comes to the door, you don't open the door, even if it's your father. You don't open the door. Now guys, maybe this is when I started to believe in women's intuition, but why would she say even if it's your father? Because personally, I think she thought that my parents were dead. And I, of course, being an obedient child, I said, okay, sure, whatever you say. Well, I don't know timing at that time, but it must have been, I don't know, a half hour or whatever. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. So remember I told you about that bathroom? Well, if you stood on the toilet seat, on my tippy toes, there was a slotted window there, and I could stand up on my tippy toes, and I can see who's at the front door. And guess what? It was my father with another man. And the other man reaches in his back pocket, pulls out his handkerchief, wipes his brow, and I see a gun sitting in his belt. I had never seen this guy before in my life. I don't know who he is. But I know the other guy's my father. And what was I told? Don't open the door, no matter who it is, even if it's your father. So I didn't open the door, and I didn't let them know that I was looking at them and watching them. Well, I have to admit to you that to me it felt like an eternity. But in reality, I think it was only 10, 15 minutes. Who was the first person to walk up the stairs? Mama Franskevich. And she lets them in, and my dad looks at me and says, "Why didn't you let me in if you knew I was here?" And I told him I was told not to do that. And he understood, obviously. Well, they stayed the night, and the story has a sad ending. Turns out that the gentleman that was with him was his buddy since kindergarten. They were best men at each other's weddings. They did practically everything together except sleep together. They were the best buddies. They played on the same soccer team. They played on the same basketball team. They were fabulous buddies. And they both were in the partisans fighting in the forest. They both went back. They left the next morning. They got to the edge of the forest, and a German Nazi patrol came upon them and started shooting at them. They started to run deeper into the forest. As they were running, my father's buddy got behind my dad, and the bullets that were headed for my dad hit him and killed him on the spot. My dad told me the story. He said he looked back, he knew he was dead, there was nothing he could do, and my dad kept going and made it. We got lucky again. During that time, unbeknownst to me also, after the Vilna Ghetto was shut down and demolished, my mother got transferred to another ghetto. And part of the reason that my mom was allowed or was able to survive is because she had a skill. And her skill was sewing. So they put her in the Kylie's ghetto where they did a lot of sewing, and they had a factory there, and they even had a fur factory. And she could sew fur garments for the nasty Nazis to survive. And because of that, she got an extra slice of bread maybe, she got an extra potato maybe, you know, she got a little more water, but certainly wasn't enough nutrition to keep you going, but she made it, okay? During that visit, when my dad came to visit me, I said to him, I said, "Pop, where's Mommy? Why isn't she with you?" And he said to me, "Son, don't worry, she's fine, she'll be okay, she'll be with us soon." I also became a killer during that time. I know you guys might think, how did this guy become a killer? Well, I did. My room was the last room, and it had a window that faced an infirmary. I mean, you really can't call it a hospital because it wasn't big enough for a hospital, but it was like an annex to a hospital. And they used to bring the wounded Nazis in. And I sat there by my window, and with this finger, I would sit there and shoot them. And I killed 10,000 of them. Why did I do that? Right? Well, first of all, I was told that those are the people that are keeping you from your parents. So they're the bad guys. Well, if they're the bad guys, I got to kill them, right? So I sat there and I killed them. In 1944, Christmas Eve, my father came to visit me again. The first words out of my mouth are, "Where's Mommy? Why isn't Mommy with you?" And he said to me, "Don't worry, the same story. She's fine, she's okay, she'll be with us soon." But what he did that night was he brought me a wooden pistol. So I took my finger, retired it, put it back in its holster, and now I had this wooden pistol. Well, unfortunately, through our travels and everything, I lost it somewhere along the way, and I wish I had it as a keepsake today. Okay? But I killed 10,000 more. Let's fast forward for a second to like 30 years after my dad's visit in 1944 on Christmas Eve. And I would sometimes go out, have a drink with my father, we'd sit and just chat. And I would say, "Pop, do you remember that time when you came to visit me?" And I asked you about Mommy, and he said, yeah. I said, what was really running through your mind? He said, oh, she was dead. I was sure that she was dead. I had lost total touch. We had lost, once I escaped, we had lost total touch with each other. And in my mind and in my heart, and especially when I heard, this is my dad talking, especially when I heard that the Vilna Ghetto was shut down, I figured that she was one of those that was murdered along or transferred to Auschwitz or something like that. And I didn't have the heart to tell you. So back to the apartment. It was, for me, as a child, I could not understand the severity of what was going on. I could not understand the horrific things that were happening. And I didn't know what was happening to my parents. I didn't understand what my mom was going through. I didn't understand what my father was going through in the forest fighting. Okay. But I had it good. I had a roof over my head. I had clothes on my back. I had food. And the most important thing that I think I had was love. I had somebody that really and truly, with all their heart, loved me and cared for me and wanted to make sure that I survived as a good human being. And I think that a lot of what I am today is because of the 3.5, close to 4 years that I spent with these people. I've learned about tolerance, learned about caring, learned about being kind to other people. That was I feel, my development years. I'm going to share a story with you now that happened and was told to me by my mother. And Mom told me this story. If she told it to me 1,000 times, it's because she was so proud of it. The war ended, and as you know, the Americans liberated the death camps. And the Russians liberated most of the ghettos. My mom was lucky. She never ended up in a death camp or a labor camp. So she was liberated by some Russians. And as she explained to me, she was standing on a railroad platform waiting for the train to come to get me at the Franskevich apartment, thinking my father is dead. And she's in rags. She is just emaciated. She's lost about 40 or 45 pounds. She's just in horrible shape. And she's sick. And she's standing on the train platform, and she says, now remember, this is my mom telling me this. She looks to the right, and she says she sees a handsome guy in a Russian officer's uniform with highly polished boots walking towards her. And she looks down the railroad platform and she says, Richard? And he looks at her and says, Lucy? And the two of them recognize each other and they run towards each other and they hug. That hug, that first hug lasts about 5 seconds. She lets go, steps back, and hauls off and smacks my father across the face. And he looks at her and says, what's wrong with you? Have you gone mad? Are you nuts? Why did you hit me? And she says to him, how dare you look so good? How dare you smell so good? How dare you be so clean? And then she hugged him and they didn't let go of each other. You can make a movie out of that. Well, they both came to the apartment, and they spent 3 weeks at the apartment, and mainly to get my mother back on her feet again. We were then taken to a displaced persons camp in Lithuania, which at that time was Poland, part of Poland. And we were there, and you gotta understand, I had never played with anybody my age or close to my age. So I didn't know the protocol. I didn't know how to behave in front of another kid or other kids, because I was always with adults. Okay. And we were at this high-rise, it was a high-rise area, and there was a burned-out tank in the yard and so on. And I was playing with the kids, and most of the kids were a little bit older than me by a couple of years. And you know, at that age, a couple of years is a lot. And one of the older kids, who was standing right next to me, and what were we doing? We were playing soldier, obviously, you know. We were playing war and we were playing soldier, because that's what they told me to do. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. And the older kid that was standing next to me picked up a rock, what looked like a rock, and he threw it. And it blew up. And a piece of shrapnel came back, put it right into his head, and killed him. And he fell right next to me, dead. And I didn't get a scratch. Got lucky again. And because of that, we were ostracized from the building that we were in, because his parents blamed me because I was standing next to him and I should have stopped him, according to them. But I didn't know it looked like a rock. And I wouldn't have known it was a grenade anyway. I wouldn't have known what to do. So we had to move to another building. And even in the displaced persons camp, things were rough and crowded. Well, thank God that my mom had a girlfriend since she was 4 years old. And that lady moved to Belgium in 1935. And she was a furrier as well, and became very, very wealthy. And somehow, and I don't know the transaction, I don't know how this happened, but somehow she searched for us. It was her best friend, and she wanted to find her best friend first if she was alive, and second of all, where she was. And she found out that my mother was alive, and she found us in this displaced persons camp, and brought money and papers, and got us out of there. And we went to Belgium through Sweden at that time. We got lucky again. So life in the ghetto, I don't remember. Life in the apartment was good. And as I mentioned to you, I can't emphasize enough the love and affection that these people gave to me. We stayed in Brussels. By the way, French was my first written language. The first language that I learned how to read and write in was French, because I went to school in Brussels. I spoke 7 different languages, forgot them all, and I'm still learning how to speak in English. But I made sure that I didn't have an accent. And you guys will get a kick out of this. I even almost failed high school French because I took it out of my head, because I said, now that I'm an American and this is my adopted country, I'm going to be an American and I'm going to speak English. So French became difficult, unfortunately. But let me ask you this. What do you think the ultimate crime in the Holocaust? Well, the ultimate crime in the Holocaust was the murder of children. The murder of children was a deliberate attempt to destroy the Jewish future. A poet had said that the death of a child is the loss of a possibility. Now, what can be said about the murder of more than 1.5 million, 1,500,000 children that were murdered by the Nazis? We're going to go, let's do the PowerPoint. Okay, obviously that cute, good-looking kid is me. You can see the proximity of Poland in Europe and so on. A little better one after this. Here's Poland, and you can see the proximity to Germany. And the Nazis didn't really have far to fly to bomb us. Now you see the way, it's Warsaw, but you see the way it's written, it's Warszawa. Because in Polish you pronounce the W like a V. So instead of saying Warsaw, you would say Warszawa. My grandparents, who were murdered by the Nazis, who I never got to meet, that particular picture, all the way on that side is my dad, my mom, my grandfather, Felicia, who was murdered and shot in the street, and my uncle, who was then taken to Auschwitz and murdered there. And this is 1 year before the bombing of Warsaw. There's my hero, my goddess. There's Halinka, 1 year before the end of the war. And that's in the back of the building that we lived in with her parents. Now, don't anybody laugh, but that outfit that I'm wearing is cool. For that time, 1948, that was cool, okay? Mom is now healthy again, and you can see the bunch of furs on her, because that was the thing with furriers. They made sure their wives wore furs and so on. But my outfit, man, you couldn't be dressed better than that. That's me with my first pair of boots in 1948 in Belgium. My mom and dad, 1 year before we came to the United States. And I never really noticed this until now, but if you look at her shoes, that's the shoes that ladies are wearing today with the high soles. The high soles, yeah. We came over on the SS Gripsholm, which was a troop ship before the war, a luxury liner after the war, and so on. And that's the only picture of us with my mother out of the cabin, because she spent 7 of the 8 days throwing up. So she was in the cabin the whole time. This is the one day Dad and I were all over the ship, and we just had a ball. My family today, -2. You can see my wife with the round glasses in the front. The 2 very pretty girls there are my 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. And the 2 guys are my son-in-laws, which don't count. And we have 2 more grandchildren. We have another boy and another girl. So there's 6. I gotta revise that picture. Okay. I want to thank you very much. I think we're going to get some questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them for you. Question was I scared at the time? I don't know if that mic is on, Karen. No, because I'm strong. No, I was not scared at the time because I didn't know what was happening. I was too young to understand. I couldn't intellectualize it, and I really didn't understand what was happening to me or what really happened to me until I was almost your age. To me, it was an adventure.
Why was your dad wearing a Russian uniform? Why was your dad wearing a Russian uniform? Why? No. What are you talking about?
Well, why was he wearing a Russian uniform? Is that the question? Is that the question? He was wearing a Russian uniform because, first of all, he stole it. And second of all, at that time, the Russians were in concert with the Americans, and it was easier to get around if you had either a Russian or American uniform.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, was your experience in the U.S. Army more... Was your experience in the U.S. Army more, scary than being the Holocaust?
Was being in the United States Army more scary than being in the Holocaust? For me?
Yeah.
No. I mean, first of all, I was in the Army in peacetime. So, okay. I didn't go to Afghanistan or any place like that.
If you were in the Holocaust, what kind of food did they serve? Because if people starved back then how often did they get the food?
That's a very good question. What kind of food did they serve, and how often did people get food? They served potatoes. They served stale bread. There was no butter, no jam. They served what they called soup, which was really a diluted hot water, and it was tasteless. And no fruit, no lettuce, no salads, and everything. It was all very horrible stuff.
My dad travels around the world, and he's my great-grandfather. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II, and he's in his diary. It said, "Why do people think this never happened?"
Why do people think that it didn't happen?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Because they're stupid.
How did you get Mr. Lucky written on your head?
How did I get Mr. Lucky? Well, it's there. It's just, it's invisible ink.
Okay.
Either not there or it's called text.
Cool it. I won't be able to hear the question. Cool it.
How did that kid not know that was a grenade instead of a rock?
How did that kid not know that was a grenade? That's a very good question. Well, first of all, we were in a bombed out area, so there was a lot of rubble around, and there were a lot of also broken pieces around. And he just picked it up. It looked like a rock. It looked like a rock, and he didn't even think to pick it up, look at it, and say, "Oh, wow." He just did this and threw it. Without looking for something.
How is life different between being in the U.S. and then in Europe?
How was what?
Life different in Poland.
How was life different in Poland than being in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you guys don't know how lucky you are to be in the U.S. Okay? Because this is number one, the greatest country in the world. And you should cherish every moment that you live here. Because even today, if you think of what's going on in the world, you don't want to be in a lot of places, okay? And you guys are lucky that you can walk in the street without somebody coming up to you and putting either a bullet in your head because you're black, or you're yellow, or you're green, or whatever you are, or because you believe in something else. No, it's not funny, gang. It's not funny because there are people that are doing things to people in this world today only because they think differently and only because they believe in a different religion. And so the fact that you believe in a different religion, so what? It's just different. Doesn't make you bad. And we've got too much of that stuff going on. It makes me sick. It's got too much of that stuff going on. And you guys should bless every day that you are living in this country. Go ahead.
Did you ever cry?
Do I ever cry?
Like during that?
I've cried a lot, folks. I've cried a lot. And there's no shame in crying. Okay? So it depends on the situation. I can cry. I'm crying right now for what's going on in different parts of the world.
When you were before, were you? Hold on. When you were in the Holocaust, after it, did anything really change since you were in hiding, or like from the life that you had then, change from there, like dramatically, or was it like very little change from when you were hiding to now?
Well, you got to remember that when I was in hiding, I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Okay. So of course there's a lot of change, and I wasn't with my parents. It's like night and day, the difference. Okay. From then to now.
Okay.
Did you or anyone in your family ever get a number tattooed on your arm?
No, I did not have a tattoo on my arm because the only place that they tattooed people was a death camp.
All right, thank you.
How does the Holocaust affect you emotionally today?
How did the Holocaust affect me emotionally?
Yeah, today.
How did the Holocaust affect me emotionally? Well, I don't think the Holocaust affected me intellectually. Emotionally, it made me sick, and it does to this day. But the time with the Franskeviches, emotionally, I think made me a stronger person.
Were you shocked when you found out what was going on in the Holocaust?
Was I shocked when what?
When you found out what happened in the Holocaust?
Was I shocked when I found out what happened in the Holocaust? Most definitely. I couldn't believe that an intelligent people, such as the Germans, who at that time were very intelligent, very learned, and had some great doctors and great scientists and so on, that they could perform such horrific acts. It just was beyond my comprehension.
Thank you.
So were you in the Holocaust, like, did you ever get like change clothes, take a shower or something? Like, in the Holocaust, you like change clothes and take a shower or something? No, like take a shower, change clothes, like don't wear the same clothes like
I need one translator. There's too many people talking. Can you?
like take a shower or something?
Now? Oh, when I was a child? Probably 2 or 3 changes, that was it.
Do you think if there hadn't been other people around your family, you wouldn't be here, standing here today? If there hadn't been any people around his family, would he be here today?
When his family hadn't taken care of him, do you think he would be here today?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't be here.
Are you still close with the Frankovics?
Malika's family is gone. They passed away. They died.
Sorry about that.
But I was close to them. We sent them papers. We sent them money. They were afraid to come over. Alinka was afraid to come over in the 60s and 70s because she had children. And at the time, the communists were ruling, and she was a marked woman as a righteous Gentile, so she was afraid that the communists would do something to her children, so she never came over.
Sorry about that.
Have you ever been back to Poland, or if you haven't, would you ever consider going back?
I have been back, but not to Warsaw. I went back to Lithuania, to the displaced persons camp, and that now is a low-income housing development. So yes, about 3 years ago.
Have you ever been back to Auschwitz?
Have
Have you ever visited Auschwitz?
I've never been to Auschwitz now.
Okay, so like you've never like once seen a piece of cake?
I what?
You've never once seen a piece of cake? Like
What?
ever?
Did you ever have a true friend that helped you through the Holocaust as a child?
I had no friends except for the Franskeviches as a child.
How did the Franskeviches explain to you what had happened to your parents, and how did you begin to understand it?
How did this people explain to you why you lived that happened?
Well, if you remember, I said that my parents made an arrangement with the Franskevich family to save the child. So the parents knew.
How did they explain that to you, though?
Huh?
How did they explain that to you? How did they tell you about it?
Oh, they didn't. They just said that I'm going to be visiting with them, and Mom and Dad will be back soon. That was it. And that was enough for me at the time because they showed me so much love.
Did your experiences benefit you in life as you were? Like, have the experiences, did they ever benefit you?
I didn't.
What you have experienced, has it benefited you? What you have experienced, has it ever benefited you?
How has what you experienced been?
I think it made me a good person. Made me understand and be tolerant. Thank you.
Let me ask you something. Are you familiar with what's happening in Israel right now?
Yes, very much.
My grandfather, something really similar happened with the Holocaust. He used to live in Palestine, and he was kicked out of there by the Jews after the Holocaust. Do you think that it's really relatable to what happened with the Holocaust? Like what's happening now?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
How old were you when all of this started, and how old were you when it ended?
I was 2.5 when I was thrown over the fence, and I was 6 when it ended.
Thank you.
2 more, and then I have some closing remarks, okay?
How do you feel to be forced?
The question was, how do I feel to be forced to live with another family. I wasn't forced. I was told that was it. So I had no choice. I love the family. One more question, that's it.
Did you ever get like a cold or?
Did I ever get sick or like a cold? No, I was lucky. I never got sick. But first of all, let me say thank you for everything that you guys are doing, learning about, and so on. I want to give me a raise of hands as to how many have seen the video Swing Kids. Okay, well, for those that have not seen Swing Kids, Christian Bale, who was the last Batman in the movies, stars in it. He made it about 30 years ago, I think, or 35 years ago when he was a teenager. And it's about 3 high school kids. One has polio, and the other 2 are athletic types. And what happens in 1935 in Austria when after Hitler became chancellor, and what happens to these 3 teenagers is very important and poignant movie for guys your age to see, because it could happen right here in our own backyard. All right, Swing Kids. The music, well, what you guys don't understand is that's real music, but it's big band, and that was abolished by Hitler. It was not allowed. You're not allowed to play jazz, and you're not allowed to listen to big band in those days. Why? Because the musicians were either Jewish or black. So these kids go underground to listen to this music. And what happens to this? The score is fantastic, but the story as to what happens to these 3 kids, and especially the one that has polio, who also plays guitar, by the way. See the movie Swing Kids. The other movie is Paper Clips. Have you seen Paper Clips? All right, beautiful. All right, and there's another movie called Defiance. Defiance is with Daniel Craig, who was the last 007, all right? And he plays one of the Biaski brothers. The Biaski brothers were 3 Jewish brothers, young in their late teens, early 20s, that saved 1,200 Jewish lives in the forest. It's a true story. Out of those 1,200, there are 25,000 people living today, all right? So 3 very, very important movies I think that you guys should get involved with. You have a question?
Okay. What were you feeling when your dad told you that your mom was okay?
Well, my dad told me what was I feeling. My dad, I had to believe him, right? I mean, I had no reason for him, I had no reason at the time to think that he was lying. And, you know, at that age, 3.5, 4, 4.5, whatever, 5 years old, it's your father. That's it. Well, thank you very much, folks.